Welcome to another episode of Kahwa, Children of Adam and Hawa, on QF Radio 91.7 FM, a special radio show for the month of Ramadan, brought to you by Adil Khan and Hamdi Blekic in collaboration with Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue, where we are speaking to our special guest today, Dr. Nur Sobers Khan, who is a curator at the Museum of Islamic Art. Welcome to the show, Nur.
Thank you, Adil. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, to begin with, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what is your work here in Doha?
Sure. Well, you already introduced me. My name is Dr. Nur Sobers Khan. I work at the Museum of Islamic Art as a curator. I'm responsible for the part of the collection coming from the Ottoman Empire, which is today modern Turkey. So my work here in Doha involves a lot of different things. I help organize exhibitions at the museum. I research the objects in the collection. I present my research at conferences and internally at the museum. There are really a lot of different aspects of being a curator.
So when we go into the museum, the layout that we see, is that designed by you?
No, that's not designed by me. But what is designed by not just me, but the other curators on my team. We're a team of 4 curators, each of us responsible for a different part of the collection. What is up to us really is, to some degree, we choose the objects that go on display. We rotate them so that every time you come to the museum in the permanent galleries, you'll see new objects, new displays, new showcases. And the other thing that we do that you'll be able to see immediately when you come into the museum is we do temporary exhibitions. So on the first floor of the museum, you have a large temporary gallery where we put on quite large shows, and we just finished ones on chess, kings and pawns, that was curated by my colleague William Greenwood. And currently on the 4th floor, also we have small galleries where we do exhibitions that change every few months, and we currently have one again by another colleague of mine, Dr. Munia Shekha Babudaya, and that one is about ceramics of Al-Andalus. So we try to change and offer our audience variety in terms of what they see when they come to the museum.
So are you saying that Museum of Islamic Art does not need to be just visited once, but if we keep visiting it after every now and then, we will see new things?
Come every day, certainly. Well, we always have activities. We have evening talks, we have tours, we have all sorts of things going on all the time. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do our best to keep things fresh and interesting for the people of Qatar. So.
Regarding your own speciality, which is in Ottoman curating, I guess the most amount of things which are available at display are manuscripts. Am I correct in that assumption?
Not necessarily. I mean, my own research focuses on manuscripts. I mean, that's what my PhD was on. That's what my research focuses on. However, if you're curating an art collection, you have to really become an expert in a lot of different media. So we have ceramics on display, we have carpets on display, glasswork, metalwork, swords, armor, everything every sort of object that was produced in the Islamic world from the dawn of Islam until basically the 19th century. So, I mean, what you see when you come to the museum is not just manuscripts, although manuscripts do figure quite prominently.
So manuscripts are books?
Kind of. They are, manuscripts. Well, manuscript, the word itself, the way we use it in English, it comes from the Latin word, which is handwritten, manu, hand, and script, of course, writing. In Arabic, of course, it's makhtuta, from khat. So, an object, a book, basically, a codex that has been written in khat, written by hand. So, they are books in the sense that they contain text, they convey information, but they haven't been printed. Someone sat down and wrote a manuscript by hand. So that's the difference between, I guess, what you would say a modern printed book and a manuscript. A manuscript is also a unique object. Only one of its kind will exist, because only one of it could have been produced in that particular form in that particular time.
But then how did people make copies of manuscripts and write commentary on the side? Would that not be a copy of a manuscript?
It's a copy, but each copy is individual. So at the beginning you asked me, so are these books, are they like printed books? This is what makes them different, is that even if you make a copy of a manuscript, it's never an exact replica. And as you mentioned, there's a long tradition with manuscripts of scholars adding their own commentaries, adding their own glosses, their definitions, sometimes adding to the text itself or altering it. So again, it's a bit different from a printed book in that it's an object that can change over time, and each copy, even if a scribe tries to make an exact copy of an original manuscript, there's still no way for it to be an exact copy, because each scribe has their individual hand. They might make mistakes, they might change or add things. So really every manuscript is a unique object.
And does one need some special skills to decipher these ancient objects?
Absolutely. I mean, in the Islamic world, manuscripts are written in a variety of languages. Of course, Arabic is the most widely used language for Islamic manuscripts, ranging in subjects from, Islamic topics such as, hadith or tafsir or fiqh, to poetry or stories of morals such as Mirrors for Princes. Really you have a wide range of topics that are written about in manuscripts and a wide range of languages. So Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, Malay. You have a number of languages that you encounter in the Islamic world. Urdu, of course. So certainly to be able to read a range of manuscripts, you need a range of languages, and you also need a range of scripts, because scripts could really be very complicated and could differ from geographical area to another geographical area, or from in different time periods. So yeah, you need long years of study sometimes to read certain types of manuscripts. For instance, I've studied maybe 7-8 years to be able to read the particular range of texts that I can read. So it does take some time.
So when you say scripts, that would mean the different ways in which Ottoman Turkish is written or Arabic is written.
Absolutely. So you have some scripts that are quite straightforward, and our listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar with scripts such as naskh or thuluth or nas ta'liq, which are scripts that we still use today as calligraphic scripts. But historically, these scripts were not always written so beautifully. So they were often written without any dots to distinguish the letters. So that's a skill in of itself, reading those types of scripts. And often the ligatures, so the way that we join the letters, were completely different historically, and scribes would do that to save time. So they would join an alif, for instance, to letters that came after it, like a dal, which is something that we wouldn't do today. And so you might look at a word and it looks completely different in the historic manuscript to how it would look the way we would write it today. So it does involve a certain amount of study, yes.
And what role did these objects of both art and scholarship play in the societies that produced them?
Well, they were extremely important. Islamic society historically is considered one of the most literate and sort of learning-obsessed societies in world history. The sheer numbers of Islamic manuscripts that we have that have survived are testament to that. So manuscripts were extremely important. There's an entire culture of copying and reproducing manuscripts, of book arts in the bindings and illustrations and illuminations that are very strong traditions across the Islamic world, from Morocco all the way to China, really. You have similar traditions.
So if I may ask, what happened?
What do you mean, what happened? Why do we no longer produce manuscripts?
Why are we not the leading learning culture of the world?
That's a question for modern historians. I would say in terms of manuscript science and Islamic codicology, we are still. Certainly in terms of religious studies, I would say that we're at the forefront. Why we've stopped producing manuscripts, of course, is the result of the advent of the printing press.
Why are we not obsessed with knowledge?
I think certain parts of society are obsessed with knowledge. I know a lot of people who are obsessed with knowledge. It's not entirely uncommon. I wouldn't sell our part of the world short. I think it's there are a lot of people who are obsessed with knowledge.
So coming back to manuscripts, sorry for that tangent.
That's fine.
Can they be considered works of art?
Absolutely. Many of them can. Some of them are what we would consider today almost a draft copy. So we have messy manuscripts that are in the hand of a famous scholar that are important for historical reasons. So we can go back and see, okay, what did Ibn Taymiyyah actually write here, or what did Al-Qastalani say in his commentary on this hadith. Those are very interesting historically, but they're not always beautiful. Instead, in terms of art, manuscripts as art, manuscripts produced at the Safavid court, for instance, or the Mughal court or the Ottoman court, were often produced as art objects. You have, for instance, illustrations of the Shahnameh or of the Khamsa Nizami. Often these works contain beautiful illustrations of the stories contained therein. And we have a number of these manuscripts on display in the museum if your listeners are curious to come and have a look and see the kind of art that was produced for manuscripts in the Islamic world. So absolutely, they can definitely be considered works of art, both in terms of script and in terms of the illumination and decoration, as well as the illustrations that accompanied the text.
And can they be considered religious, or is every product of the Islamic world religious?
Well, that's a question that is debated, especially in the context of Islamic art. Whenever I give tours at the museum, I try to discuss with the people on the tour what they understand as Islamic art. Like, is it something that was produced purely in the service of the faith, or can it be considered any kind of art that was created in the Islamic world? So, for instance, a beautifully illuminated, beautifully written Quran is unequivocally Islamic art because it was created in the service of the Islamic faith. But, for instance, a beautiful, illustration of a Shahnameh, for instance, it's a bit more ambiguous. Yes, it was produced in the Islamic world. Decoratively, it might share some common decorative motifs as the Quran in the illumination, for instance, or the binding or the script. However, can we consider it Islamic art? I mean, this is a debate that is still going on in the field today. I tend to think that any beautiful work of art that was produced within the wider Islamic world can be considered Islamic art. But this is a question that we can debate all day, really. There's no clear answer.
And your opinion would be because of the appreciation of beauty in things? Absolutely.
I mean, I think Islamic art or objects that were produced in the Islamic world have a certain unity in the... Unity in diversity is sort of the phrase that we use to describe Islamic art, because you have similar geometrical motifs, floral motifs, a similar use of decoration across all different media, across all different geographical areas, that gives you a sort of artistic unity that allows you to identify something that can be called Islamic art. So that's why I would say that it's not just limited to objects that were made purely in the service of Islamic faith.
You are listening to Kahwa, Children of Adam and Hawa, on QF Radio 91.7 FM, a special radio show for the month of Ramadan, brought to you by Adil Khan and Hamdi Blekic in collaboration with Doha International Center for Interfaith Dialogue, where we are speaking to our special guest today, Dr. Nur Sobers Khan, curator at the Museum of Islamic Art. Coming back to the question of manuscripts, Dr. Nur, how do manuscripts differ from period to period and from place to place in the Islamic field?
Well, they differ they really differ very widely. The earliest manuscripts we have, of course, are they consist in Quranic text. So they're fragments of the Mus'haf itself, the text of the Quran, and they're written without any decoration, and the purpose was purely to create a mnemonic device that allowed early believers to remember the text of the Quran. And so these are the earliest Islamic manuscripts that we have. They're very different from later manuscripts. As Islamic civilization became more complex and developed its own artistic traditions, we really have a flowering of the book arts. Scripts multiply. We develop a number of cursive scripts as well as the original Hijazi or Kufic scripts, which were very angular and simple. The genres of manuscripts multiply as well. I mean, you begin to have, beyond religious texts, you have works on science, on astronomy, astrology, engineering. Every possible imaginable branch of knowledge developed a manuscript tradition in the Islamic world. And as I mentioned before, I mean, in the later period, so say starting with the Timurids in the early 15th century, you really see a flowering of manuscript illustration and painting. It really comes into its own and becomes a very complex and sophisticated art form that's then taken forward by the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals.
Why then?
Why then? That's actually a very, very good question, and I'm not entirely sure of that. You have influence. Well, one of the arguments is that you have an influence from China, certainly in Chinese art, that becomes very important in the post-Mongol period in the Islamic world. That is said to influence Persian painting. And that provided a kind of impetus for the creation of a very sort of Persianate Islamic form of painting. But it's why anything and why at any point in time? It's very difficult to say.
Perhaps has it got to do with the techniques and the technology available for producing these things at ease? I mean, I would say availability of paper, the availability of paint.
No, paper was always available, as were pigments. I mean, you have painting in an earlier period. I mean, you have Mamluk era painting coming out of Egypt and Syria in, say, the 14th and 15th centuries. With the Timurids, I mean, I think the movement of people associated with the creation of great empires, such as the Mongol Empire or the Timurid Empire, is very important. Because what the Timurids did, for instance, is they would, any place, Timur, as I'm sure our audience know, created an enormous empire that spanned from Syria through Central Asia, including parts of what's today northern India, what's now Iran. And what he would do is anywhere he conquered, he would take the most talented craftsmen back to his capital at Samarkand. So it's possible that this mix of artists from all over the Islamic world, Central Asia, China, caused the creation of a new art form that manifested itself in the form of Timurid painting. That's quite possible.
Could it be called a kind of a renaissance?
Yes, I mean, there are many renaissances in the course of Islamic history. You have many different periods during which the book arts, manuscript culture, knowledge, painting flourish. I would say the Timurid period is one of them. The Mamluk period is certainly another. The Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals, whose empires really flourish in the 16th, 17th centuries, I would say they are also great patrons of the arts of the book as well as knowledge. So, I mean, Renaissance is really a European term. I mean, I would say that within the context of Islamic history, broadly speaking, you have numerous instances in which the production of manuscripts flourishes.
So you would call perhaps a revival of a sort of an aesthetic.
I wouldn't even say a revival, maybe the creation of a completely new aesthetic in many ways. I mean, it was a very innovative and inventive method of painting that was created in the Timurid period. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a revival. I mean, a revival maybe would be in the Qajar period, which is sort of 19th century Iran, when artists would try to recreate earlier Safavid paintings from the 16th century. That is more strictly speaking a revival. But, I mean, not every time that you have a flourishing of the arts, it's not always a revival or a renaissance. Sometimes it's actually just a naissance.
Because they do not have the same relationship to the human figure the way the rest of the Muslim world perhaps might have.
No, I mean, I would say that painting, I mean, the depiction of the human figure is something that obviously has been recently the subject of a lot of controversy and discussion. Both in the Islamic world and outside of the Islamic world. And one thing I like to mention on my tours is whenever we look at manuscripts that contain illustrations of the human figure, is that artists would always try to portray humans in a very stylized manner, using proportions that were not accurate, and using very stylized facial features, so that they weren't actually doing a drawing from life. So the figures that are depicted in Persian painting, for instance, are not true to life. They're sort of idealized, very stylized depictions of humans. And this was done so that artists wouldn't necessarily claim to be trying to create something like God's creation. So there was a knowledge and a consciousness, even in the 15th, 16th centuries, that the depiction of the human figure had to be approached very carefully and with due respect for sort of religious sensibilities. Exactly, yeah.
I'm trying to understand what you just explained about the human figure. So is it a type of an art for aspiring towards what one should look like rather than an imitation of reality? An art of aspiration.
I wouldn't say it's so much aspiration as idealization. I mean, you see the same thing in the depiction of flowers, say, in Safavid painting, where they're very idealized forms of flowers. You can't actually identify what kind of flower they are. They're just very stylized. They're some kind of flowers of paradise, imaginary flowers that human eyes have yet to see. So I wouldn't say that necessarily it's something for us to aspire to, in the sense that certainly we should all aspire to be good, so that, we eventually go to heaven, inshallah. I mean, certainly that's the idea, but the idea is not necessarily to paint an ideal human figure that we should aspire toward. I mean, that's much more so a concept in, Greek statuary or what have you. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the case in Islamic art. This is more, in Islamic art, I would say it's more a case of abstraction than aspiration.
On a different tack, your own personal research, hours and hours and months and years put on deciphering these ancient texts, we only get to see them through a glass window. So what is the experience of actually observing them up close?
It can be really a very amazing experience, really very awe-inspiring. Especially if you're handling a manuscript that you realize is written in the hand of a famous scholar. So, for instance, the other day I was on a course in Manchester at the John Rylands Library, and they have a manuscript that was written, that has an inscription in the hand of Al-Maqrizi, the famous Mamluk era scholar who wrote the Khitat and a number of other historiographical works. And to see an inscription actually in his hand that we can compare to other manuscripts of the same period is really very awe-inspiring. Other times, I mean, depending on the manuscript, sometimes, they can smell horrible. They can be moldy, or, they can be quite harmful to your health. You can inhale mold spores or plague bacilli that have been, latent in this manuscript for 500 years that no one has opened. So, I mean, sometimes it's advisable to wear a mask if the manuscript hasn't been treated yet. And really, if you look at manuscripts that are illuminated or illustrated, it is truly an awe-inspiring experience to see up close the paintings that were made, so many hundreds of years ago. You do feel a very direct connection with the past when you get to handle such objects.
Do you get to use material to preserve these manuscripts as well, like chemical agents?
Well, that's not my job. As a curator, I'm really a researcher. But at the museum, of course, we have a team of conservators who are really excellent, and they are the ones who work with the materiality of the object and who preserve the objects and stabilize them. And their knowledge of, say, the material composition of the pigments that went into the manuscript illustrations is really encyclopedic and really very amazing. And the work that they do is incredible, because we couldn't actually put any of our manuscripts on display without them passing through the hands of a conservator. So perhaps that's a subject for another interview with another member of MIA staff one day.
So do these, on close observation of these manuscripts, are you able to read between the lines as well and see what kind of hidden histories are there, which are not revealed by those who had the power to write?
Well, I would say that could be the case with any text. And it depends on the text that you're reading, certainly. And if you mean people who didn't necessarily have the power to write, one thing that's interesting about manuscripts and manuscript culture is that if you look through a manuscript catalogue, every single writer, every single scribe, every single artist, illuminator, illustrator will be a man. So you ask, what was the role of women in manuscript production? How can we find their voices and their role in knowledge, the production of knowledge, the patronage of arts and knowledge? So what you can find, for instance, are in the seals and inscriptions of manuscripts. You can find often that they were owned or commissioned by women. So, for instance, the Mughal women, the emperors of India before the British, many of the females of the Mughal dynasty were avid patrons of the arts and of manuscripts and the production of manuscripts. And the Mughal Imperial Library, the base, or actually a large part of that collection was commissioned by Hamida Banu Begum, who's Akbar the Great's mother, for instance. And so if we look at all of the different seals and inscriptions on the inside of a manuscript, we can find her seal, which was in the shape of a flower, among all of the seals of the men, demonstrating that she, as a woman, had a large role in commissioning and owning these manuscripts. In our collection at the Museum of Islamic Art, we have a number of Ottoman Qur'ans that were written by women. The scribe was a woman, or they were owned or commissioned by women. So that's perhaps one of the ways where we can find stories of historical figures who aren't obviously and immediately represented in the research.
So what possible role could women play in these societies where they did not have a chance to express themselves as openly? I mean, why would they be interested in a learning culture?
Well, the same reason they are today. I mean, you have women who are curious and interested and want to learn. Even today, there's no need to look so surprised. So we have a number of, for instance, audition documents and inscriptions at the end of hadith manuscripts, for instance. And you'll have a famous scholar saying, I read this manuscript out loud in the presence of the following people. And he'll list a number of his students, and then he'll say, and my daughter Fatima, and my wife Aisha, and her sister Khadija, and my niece, Hamda. They were all there, and they listened to this manuscript as well, and offered their critiques. So, I mean, you do find evidence that women were very interested in knowledge. That the ijaza then permits a person to transmit a particular text. So you do have women who received ijazas you could receive an ijaza to do a number of things. You could receive an ijaza as a calligrapher, and then you could write text. You could receive an ijaza as a scholar to transmit texts. And you do have some evidence that women were active, especially in the transmission of hadith, and occasionally as scribes, particularly in the Ottoman period.
We will have to leave the question of women in pre-modern Islamic societies for another episode. Perhaps we can have Dr. Nur Sobers Khan come back again and discuss that question, which is of much interest for, I'm sure, a lot of our listeners, especially myself.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of the Ramadan. And if you have some greeting for our listeners regarding Ramadan.
Yes, thank you very much to all of the listeners, and Ramadan Kareem to everyone, and please come visit us at the Museum of Islamic Art.
From Adil Khan and Hamdi Blekic, we would like to say goodbye and Ramadan Kareem with this parting thought that the most brilliant products of a culture or a time are its art and its knowledge, and they can only be possible with patronage. So for all those who are listening, consider that you have to support the people of culture and the people of knowledge in your society, if not financially, then at least by appreciating them. Thank you very much, and Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you.